I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked. They're gone. If they've been working and are law-abiding, we should say, here are the conditions for you staying. You have to pay a stiff fine because you came here illegally. You have to pay back taxes, and you have to try to learn English, and you have to wait in line.
Wow. Based Hillary Clinton. Who remembers her back from, I think, 2008, that video clip came from? What a time to be alive, where now that exact stance makes you a racist, makes you in many circles not Catholic. It makes you a hard-hearted, cold-blooded individual who doesn't care about the poor, doesn't care about immigrants, and really only cares about white supremacy and your own selfish interests. And so that is a pretty wild transition we've had over these last 17 or so years on the topic of immigration. As recent as almost a decade ago, I think it was in 2013, we had another popular Democrat who shared a similar position.
The best way to solve this problem is by working together to pass that kind of common sense law. But until that happens, there are actions I have the legal authority to take as president, the same kinds of actions taken by Democratic and Republican presidents before me, that will help make our immigration system more fair and more just. Tonight, I'm announcing those actions. First, we'll build on our progress at the border with additional resources for our law enforcement personnel so that they can stem the flow of illegal crossings and speed the return of those who do cross over. Second, I'll make it easier and faster for high-skilled immigrants, graduates, and entrepreneurs to stay and contribute to our economy, as so many business leaders have proposed. Third, we'll take steps to deal responsibly with the millions of undocumented immigrants who already live in our country. I want to say more about this third issue because it generates the most passion and controversy. Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children.
This policy led to the following year where President Obama surpassed even Donald Trump's highest year of deportations. He hit new records. It was the highest year we've had in the last 25 years since the turn of the 21st century. Really, really interesting. What's going on, everybody? This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield. I am the host and founder of Seeking Excellence. Seeking Excellence exists to help you fulfill your potential in this life, to help you realize the God-given potential that you have and help you strive for excellence in every area of your life. You know, I had somebody on LinkedIn recently comment on one of my posts and say, where in the Bible does Jesus say anything about seeking excellence? And to me, this shows a divorce from reality, a divorce from reason, where we're only looking at what the Bible says on what we should do in our lives and not using our gift of reason to apply biblical principles to our daily life. And this is exactly what we're going to get into today, this idea of immigration. You know, Jesus doesn't necessarily have something specific to say on how many illegal immigrants should you let into your country every year. But we do have biblical principles. We have church teaching that we can utilize to form our opinion on our current circumstances. And that's what excellence is all about. It's about being virtuous, being holy in every aspect of your life, and striving to glorify God, to honor God in all that you do, not limiting that to just an hour on Sundays, not limiting that just to your spiritual life, but how do you honor God in your finances, in your relationships, in your mental health, in your physical health, as well as how do you honor God by your beliefs and your stances on social issues and how you vote and how you operate as a citizen of a free country. And that's what we're going to get into today. Blessed today to be joined by my friend Bridget over at According to Bridget. So if you are on Instagram, you definitely need to follow Bridget at According to Bridget. You can see here some of her posts. She's funny. She's awesome. She's a young mother of two. And she is just one of my favorite people, one of my favorite Instagram friends, as I call the people who I haven't had the opportunity to meet in real life. but she has a free email list. She also has a Substack where you'll be able to see even some of the topics of things that we talked about here today. So you can subscribe to her on Substack, and you can follow her on Instagram to find more content from Bridget. This is her second time. I was excited to welcome her back to Seeking Excellence for this second time, and we had a great conversation today on things that are being very misunderstood and misinterpreted in the Trump administration so far. Things like immigration, things like deportations, and things like tariffs. So if you've been confused on tariffs and you want to know more about what's this whole tariff policy, people are saying that it's going to wreck our economy, make everything more expensive for Americans. We have a great example that's already taken place in these first 2 weeks that we're going to be hitting on today and sharing more about what these tariffs can actually look like when they're rolled out in a strategic way to help American people and the American economy. So stick around to the end so you can catch that. If you don't follow me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, I invite you to do that there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a small channel, but I'm very excited to say that we're getting super close to 1,000 subscribers. Maybe we'll even have hit that by the time this episode comes out. But if you love Seeking Excellence, you'd like to support us, going over and subscribing on YouTube, liking the video, commenting, sharing it would be super, super helpful. We share a lot of video and stuff. We're reacting to different things today. So if you want the full experience, you should watch us on YouTube rather than listening to Apple and Spotify. But wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening, we're glad you're here. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Bridget, my friend, it is so good to see you. I'm really excited to record again. I feel like we've been talking about this for, 6 months, bringing you back on the podcast. And so it's great to have you back at Seeking Excellence.
Yeah, I think I was on your podcast. It's been literally years now. So I'm excited
Seriously?
to be back. I wasn't sure if I was really welcome back since it's been years, but I'm glad, glad we worked that out.
It has been a while. I've really wanted to do that and I think I've talked to you about this a little bit before, but wanting to get kind of into a more, at least I've been considering getting into more of like a consistent rotation of guests rather than always seeking out new guests.
Yeah.
And you've always been top of my list for that. And you were top of my list when I talked about, I did an episode recently with Chris, Christopher Quinn on Instagram. And that was something that I was trying to institute. It's kind of like a current events type thing. And really wanted to have you as part of that rotation. So this is going to be more of a Monday episode rather than a Friday one, but still kind of hits the same, feel, if you will.
Sounds great. I'm excited. I actually, I listen to your podcast a lot, but I just listened to your last episode with Jacob, and we actually went to Belmont Abbey at the same time. So I was
I saw you
all
post
these
that.
Belmont Abbey connections.
That's really exciting. I love it. So today, wanted to talk about a number of different things, but really kind of, I think the theme of the episode is talking about things that are just really misinterpreted or misunderstood about this Trump administration. We're now, as of recording in our second week of President Trump being back in office, and depending on who you are and what your stances on certain things are, it's been pretty awesome. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday at the barbershop, which is always an interesting place because you never know what certain people believe. There's some very interesting characters in my barbershop, and something about deportations came up. My barber's Mexican, lives here in Denver, and his father is I don't know what his role is. He's probably told me before, but he's got some type of role in the Democrat Party here in Denver. He's like pretty heavily involved, like super, super leftist. And my barber seems to be kind of in the middle. They're kind of like a quasi-Catholic Mexican family, from my understanding. I don't know that he goes to mass like every Sunday, but I think he occasionally goes. And it's super interesting. But we kind of got on this topic. He was talking about his dad was warning him that with these deportations, getting up to the level that they are, that like people are going to start stopping him. And like if he gets pulled over by the police, what to do, just because like they're going to start stopping Mexicans. And my kind of rebuttal to him was saying that what's interesting about that is Obama had more deportations than Trump did. And, the Obama second term and Trump's first term. And I don't remember that ever happening then, anybody in my family, or like I get told that I look Hispanic all the time. I was like, I never got pulled over and asked to see my papers and things like that. I was like, did that happen to you in 2012 to 2016? And what was funny is this guy, like neck tats, all this stuff over there, was like, yeah, Obama did have more deportations than Trump. I was like super hype about it. So
those facts, man, they'll get you every time.
They really hurt. That's what I said. I was like, that's not an opinion. That's data. But I want to talk to, turn it over to you and just kind of ask what, you probably similar frustrations that I've experienced, but what was kind of your spark to have your post recently on immigration? What's kind of your general stance on it so far now that we're a week and a half in?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've gotten a few messages saying I'm not allowed to have an opinion because I'm a white conservative, which is sort of funny because I feel like that same argument is used about abortion. Not allowed to have an opinion if you're a man. So it's interesting that the logic is not logicking there.
Sure.
But yeah, so my post was trying to share the church's teaching on immigration, and people don't like facts. So it's not my opinion that the catechism says that, and I didn't actually write the catechism. I was just trying to share what was in there and what the church says. And in her wisdom, right, she doesn't separate reason from, I don't want to say emotions, but the head and the heart, right? The church is really, really good at balancing those perfectly. We don't always carry it out perfectly, but the teaching balances it perfectly, right? So people really lean too far one way or the other. And I would even say some conservatives are too far. Like, I'm not for going into a school and pulling kids out in the middle of a school day kind of situation like they're talking about. I think the issue is we don't just take like a second and be like, what's actually happening? Like you said, what actually happened during that time when we were hearing there were so many deportations? And the media has us in a state of constant frenzy, of one thing or another. And this is just an easy target. But one thing I would point to is that the majority of Hispanics that are here legally voted for Trump. So it's interesting that they would do that if he's just like so immigrant, doesn't want any of them here. It's also bad for them to have an influx of unchecked migrants come in that we don't know where they're from. They're taking, a lot of them are getting paid under the table. So they're taking jobs. So it's just interesting to me to note that the legal immigrants don't want them here either. It's not, this isn't like just some privileged person that's from America saying that, like, that they voted for Trump and knowing that was his plan. So the biggest frustration for me is just that he is going after criminals that are very obviously criminals, lots of convictions and things like that. And they're talking about he's going to come to your house and take your granny. I heard some saying that on their podcast, and it's just like, that's not how this is working. Now, do I think that it's actually a difficult topic to say, like, I'm not sure I'm for, like, round up everybody who didn't come here and their children, they've been here 3 generations now, right? Like, I think it's a little bit hard to say, like, hey, you've never lived there, you didn't come here on your own, we're going to round you up and take you back. So I think there's some room for discussions on those kind of things and, like, common sense things, but it is common sense to say you have to have a border, you have to stop the bleeding, and you have to send violent criminals back where they came from. I think those are like fairly common sense things. But of course, because Trump says them, we all have to lose our minds about it.
You have to hate that was kind of my other point in the barbershop was you can kind of tell where somebody's at on almost every social issue, right? There's some level of just extremism where you can just say, like, this is the threshold that if we don't at least agree on this, not saying like, I think you should be burned at the stake. But, there's certain people that say, like, if we don't agree on certain things, even they're extreme, then I'm like, I have to hate you. I don't think that's the case. But I think there's a certain level of extremism where it's like, okay, you're not reasonable on this. Like, you're not being rational. And to me, deporting criminals, especially people convicted or arrested for violent crimes, for sexual crimes, like, there should be zero tolerance for that. Like, just 0% tolerance for people who are committing crimes, who've already committed a crime to come here and then are committing crimes once here. Just the fact that, you have so many Democrats that are voting against that in Congress, or people who are actually taking it, are actually against that stance. You can really, again, kind of go back. One of the easy ways to kind of find that threshold, whether it's abortion, whether it's immigration, whether it's, LGBTQ stuff, is just go back to, like, where Democrats were in, like, the 2000s, right? It's a great way to just say, okay, if, like, Hillary was saying it in 2008, then it doesn't mean that it's good. But it's like that can at least be the cutoff. Like, if she was a strong advocate for it, just like, abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, could be a good segue to some of the stuff RFK is saying in his hearings this week. But I just think that that's a kind of threshold that says, like, okay, do we at least agree? Hillary is all for criminal illegal immigrants being sent back to their countries. Like, do you at least agree on that? And if somebody's like, no, like, everybody should be able to stay, like, we're a country of immigrants, it's like, all right, then it's not worth really having the conversation.
Yeah. And that's something too, is like, there is a reasonable prudence of, like, is this conversation worth having? But I find that some people have just really never heard any other side of the story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, especially if you live in the very online world, you're going to hear a lot of crazy things and you just hear them repeated a lot. And then people don't talk about them in the real world very often because they're worried about getting stigmatized one way or another. So they just don't talk about it. But yeah, I think you make a great point. Trump's really not that conservative. He's
Right.
he's an old school Democrat is what he is. And like, we're just like all over here raving about it because it's been so bad, but it's better than what we had. It's just reasonable, common sense things. So, you brought this up when we were chatting before that Obama deported more people than Trump did in his first term. But
100%.
nobody wants to talk about that. So
Yep. Yeah. That's often forgot fact that Obama was known by a lot of people as the deporter in chief back in the day. I think a lot of illegal immigrants or people who were just coming here. It's pretty crazy to think about. I actually pulled this up here from, what is this website? ABC7. So this is just like this is a recent article. It's actually written. You can see up top here, January 27th. So just 2 days ago, as of our recording, this was released. It just kind of gives you like a little summary. According to ICE, these are the on the ground facts. It says, Immigration agency says it arrested 956 people nationwide on Sunday, over 1,000 on Monday, and more than 3,400 since Trump took office 1 week ago. Over the last 20 years, immigrant removal spiked at 432,000 in 2013 under President Obama. In his busiest year, Trump never even hit that. Trump has even broken Obama's record. And think about that. Like, Trump really wants to. He probably will this presidency. But it's just amazing to me to think that not even Obama, to think like, not Obama in 2009. Like, this was the beginning of his second term, that it spiked, which is pretty amazing to see that. And even Biden, the Biden administration at 329 in 2024, the most of his term, presumably trying to clean it up, right? Election year. And they know that this is a hot button issue. Kamala Harris was seen as the border czar. She was named the border czar by the Biden administration and the mainstream media. And then they tried to pull that back and rope that one back in after she did a miserable job with it. But you can see 329,000 in 2024, his most, and Trump's most in his first presidency was 347. That's less than 20,000 off. I don't know the percentage of that, but what would that be?
yeah, I mean, it's not far off.
7% difference.
I think you're right that he will beat that, but I think sort of like inflation, right? There's a whole lot more to beat now, right? Like we did not have the level of immigration that we have had over the past 4 years. And people that we've just lost that we know even where they are or anything like that. So I think he will beat it, but just because of sheer numbers of what was coming through the border.
Yeah, I think that's right. He has much more opportunity.
That's right. That's right.
It's kind of like Biden was able to be the jobs president because he came in at the tail end of COVID, right? He just had seized the opportunity that was there by hampering down the economy and then bringing it back.
Yeah, I read somewhere that something like 60% of the jobs added while he was president were government jobs. So,
oh wow,
I'm not sure. That stat is accurate. He brought a lot of jobs, but I think it was over 50% of the jobs were government jobs, which is basically just meaning like, did we create those jobs or are our taxes just paying more government employees? So
right. Or is this just kind of fake? But I want to get into, so you made a really good point here with your post talking about just kind of the appeal that you see so many Christians making, right? I think your post had a Protestant pastor, wasn't it? On the front?
I don't know. He's a reverend of some kind.
Yeah, let me look here. Yeah, Reverend Benjamin Creamer. It kind of looks like he's a Protestant guy.
Yeah,
but this quote you pulled from him: "When we Christians are more known for our support of presidents than we are for our support of the poor, the immigrant, the marginalized, and the oppressed, that is when we know we are following someone other than Jesus, and we have a lot of repenting to do." What's most frustrating to me, and I shared a tweet that kind of talked about this, I think it was from Eric Sammons, talking about the many letters we're receiving from bishops. There's a lot of bishops' councils from different states that are coming together, and there are bishop conferences from different states that are coming together to unite on these letters condemning the deportations. And my favorite tweet, the reason why I love this tweet so much is he was like, all these years, 4 years of Biden pushing for abortion, Biden pushing, transgenderism into schools and promoting LGBTQ policies and all this stuff, hampering down on religious liberties. Like, where do we see the letters against that, right? Occasionally you'd see like individual bishops. I know there was like the Colorado bishops at one point put out a letter on abortion, but that was more of like a state issue when we were voting for it or against it. And you didn't see that as much from the USCCB or these like so many bishops who were outraged during the last 4 years. But now suddenly Cardinal Cupich is really loud now again. Now that Trump's back in office. And so that I found really frustrating, but wanted to give you some opportunity to share a little bit about some of the research you did there, and just to kind of, I kind of break it down to two main things, but what does the church actually teach and what you pull from the catechism? I was pulling previously from the USCCB, so it was even better to see you're kind of pulling from the catechism there on immigration.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing which we get lost on is that we actually, and I'll just read this from the catechism. It says, the political community has a duty to honor the family, to assist it, and to ensure especially the right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, and the right to emigrate. Which emigrate with an E means you have the right to leave your country if those things are not available to you. That does not inherently give you the right to enter another specific country, right? Now, there are ways to do that. You know, we do have a system in place. I think there's a big argument to be made for the fact that legal immigration system is not good to come into our country either, which is why a lot of people skip it. Because I do know people who have come here legally and it's very expensive and it takes a really long time and all those things. So like, I think it's good to have a process in place. I don't think ours is great. I'm not going to pretend to have the answer for how we fix all of that. I think it's a longer process than, right now. But if you look at that, what that says in there also, the right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, that also means for us, like here in this country, like this isn't, not every other country are the countries that emigrate. Now, that is usually what happens, but you have that same right in your country, right? So like what happens then when they're taking those things, when they're on your private property and those sorts of things? So I find when you break this down to a micro level and ask people like, hey, do you want them in your house? It changes really quick. Nobody wants to like change anything that they're doing. They just want somebody else to take care of it. And I heard
Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, exactly. I heard a really great, like, I can't remember what podcast I heard this on, but they were basically just saying that if we live in a culture where we expect the government to take care of it, right? So we're like, that's a bad thing. The government should do something. Whereas true Christian charity would be like, that's a bad thing. What can I do about it? Right. And so if your first thought is like, why isn't the government fixing this? Then that just means you've gone off the rails, because the principle of subsidiarity is at the lowest possible level, right? And for us, the lowest possible level is the people that we know. How can we help in some sort of way? And so I do think there are opportunities out there for that. But most of us are just like, hey, we don't like that. What's the government going to do about it? So I think we start off with the wrong thought process. And I actually think the U.S. bishops are doing that to some extent. It's like, hey, we don't like what the government is doing here. So we're going to write these letters, et cetera. But like, what are you doing about it? And what they are doing about it is funneling money through Catholic charities. So we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah.
But in 2023, I don't think there are finalized numbers for 2024 yet. But 2023, $155 million went to just the generic like Catholic charities in the United States for migrant services. And that does not count any of the local chapters, which are really hard to track just because it gets down to like, they're sending money to this diocese and that diocese. So it's hard to get a final number, but just 155 million just to the general Catholic charities specifically for migration services. And then I follow his name is Todd Bensman, and he works really closely on a lot of this stuff going down into South America to these camps and things where they're bringing people through. A lot of these camps are run by Catholic charities, and they are funneling cartels and children and etc. through these camps that the federal government's money is going to through Catholic charities through the USCCB. So it's a whole mess there. But my basic thing with that is if you're getting government money, you get government strings, right? And so this is super unpopular opinion, but I don't think that I would give up our 501c3 status as a church to not be tied to like what the government's telling us to do. I think that like we're just never going to get out of their clutches, for lack of a better term, until we're not taking money from them. And we're not, the bishops are not willing to say they're not going to cut off the money. So that's a whole other unfortunate topic, because we are meant to be, churches were the original charity, right? It wasn't the government, it was churches. And we are meant to do that. And I think something that gets lost in here is nobody's arguing that we shouldn't treat these people with dignity, right? Like every human has dignity. It doesn't matter where you are, even what crime you've committed, right? Like there's human dignity, but you do give up some of those rights or some of those things, by your actions. Actions have consequences, right? So I don't think anybody's arguing for they're acting like
Any criminal does.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Legal or illegal. And that's another thing, I guess, by definition, they're all here illegally. Right. So there is a crime being committed. Now you could argue the seriousness and whether it's really asylum and all that stuff, but every country has laws for immigration. Every country. Some of us are ignoring them right now, but every country does, because otherwise you don't have a country. It's as simple as that. Right. So yeah, it is frustrating. They managed to speak out on certain things. And I could even tie that in a little bit to, I was listening to the JFK or RFK Jr. hearings today. And, they've painted him as like a psychopath.
Right.
And I'm a self-proclaimed crunchy mom, I guess. But, when you start digging into all of this stuff that is just the norm for our kids. And, when I was a kid, I think it was like 24 shots by the time you were 18. Now it's something like 87 or 90, somewhere around there, that kids will, of these vaccine shots. And so, in my opinion, what RFK Jr. is saying is, hey, let's do more testing, because they haven't been tested. And everyone is acting like he's anti-vax, which he really isn't. He wants more tested. I would say I would classify myself as anti-vax, but I don't think he is. But where I'm going with this is that the USCCB, in the majority of dioceses across the country, even though the USCCB has put out a letter saying this is a matter of conscience, particularly because many of them contain aborted fetal cells. And if you don't believe me, go look at it at the website. It's cogforlife.org, childrenofgodforlife.org. And they have traced every single vaccine back to the fetal cells that it was created with. They don't all have them, but any that do, they've traced them back to. And so the USCCB put out a letter saying, it's a matter of conscience. You do not have to do this for various reasons, but that is one of them. And then the majority of dioceses in our country do not allow religious exemptions for Catholic schools. So, it's another, and the main reason that I can gather from people who have spoken to their bishops is it's a liability issue. They're concerned about the government pulling the money from their schools if they start to have outbreaks and things like that. And so it just keeps coming back to government money, right? So, and I think you would get a whole lot more donations from people if you did pool the government money that they're concerned about losing.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You do get more charity, right? Just like I think the same thing with taxes and a lot of these, safety nets, these social safety nets that we have, and all these different, benefits or entitlement programs and things like that. A large reason why we have to have those and why people don't feel the need to take care of their family or to help people in their local areas is like the government's supposed to do that. I've ranted against that many times. Just want to give some context too, to kind of what has brought this back up. This debate between bishops and conservatives, if you will, or the church and conservatives. I've seen some interesting takes on this between Vance and the bishops. So he kind of took aim at them recently. This article is one that I found that I think was more middle of the road. There's obviously, you have like the National Catholic Reporter is very upset about it, and your left-leaning ones. But I've even seen some somewhat conservative, I think like pretty conservative Orthodox priests and stuff tweeting about this on X. And it's been interesting to me to see how many of them have taken the stance of, or taking defense of the bishops. Now, for me, I think you and I probably are similar on this. I am not one to rush to the defense of the USCCB or the bishops. That is for certain. I think there are many good ones. I think there are many bad ones. And I think that generally they can be compromised, and they do things like this. And I think that that's one of the reasons, right? Everything that I kind of pointed to earlier of where were the letters, where was the outrage during the last 4 years? Now suddenly you're livid, and I'm supposed to just believe that. It's just goodwill, and you're just kind of worried about the migrants. Speaking to the point that you also shared, this is another thing that was kind of going around recently, was the Vatican cracking down on illegal entry into its territory. So you mentioned this, that every country has their own immigration laws. The Vatican is its own, nation state and has its own city state, and it has its own laws on that. And it's toughened sanctions for those who try to enter illegally in areas where free access is not allowed. So you can see that here. Everybody has their own laws. In a decree last month by the Holy See, the monetary sanctions and prison sentences for those who violate the strict security regulations of Vatican City have been considerably increased. And so that's interesting as well, right? The Vatican's tightening up its laws on illegally being somewhere that you're not supposed to be, as is the United States of America. And I think going back to your point there on the fact that the policy, or the church teaching, if you will, not the policy, but the church teaching on immigration, it says things on both you're allowed to leave your country, which shows that countries like Russia or North Korea that prevent citizens from leaving are committing human rights violations, right? When they're already committing human rights violations and then they're saying, no, and now you can't leave. China does this as well. You see that those are human rights violations based on church teaching and our understanding of human dignity. But then you also have the fact that we also have all of the same rights. And so when people are coming into your country and violating those, that it does go both ways. For all the people who, pack their bags, I saw some funny reels about people leaving after Trump got inaugurated. That is your right to do. Your
Catechism says,
right.
Go ahead.
Your God-given right. And we honor that and support it. That is for sure. You are welcome to leave. But I think you're exactly right that it was interesting to me because a lot of people, even the Orthodox, going back to those priests who I saw responding to JD Vance and his words there, a lot of people go and they looked up basically the USCCB's financial reports, right? And whether it was 123 million or whatever they were given last year from the government, I forget the exact number. I think you mentioned it, but it was like they gave $1 million extra. That's the only thing I really remember was key. There was $1 million extra dollars actually were designated on their tax forms as going to immigration in some capacity, right? To serving illegal immigrants. That was like the line item, if you will. So it was 123 was given, 124 went out. And people kind of looked at that. And if you're somebody who's not skeptical, I don't want to label you and I as crazy conspiracy theorists, but we're definitely skeptical, I would say. And you could clarify that if you think I'm misspeaking for you not skeptical. I don't think you can be anti-vax and not be skeptical. Yeah. But the thing about that is, yes, you have, if you just look a layer deeper, you mentioned many things and many ways that can be manipulated. Like, yes, it's all going to XYZ. But it's just like you could look at a nonprofit, right? And it says they made $10 million, but they paid, $11 million to their employees. And it's like, yes, that's exactly right. That's what we're kind of claiming is the problem here, right? Is that people are making a lot of money off this. And that's exactly what people who went a layer deeper started to see and kind of pointed out was, yeah, they're funneling money to these NGOs. And this is the same thing that a lot of conservatives will criticize non-government organizations, nonprofits, and C3s in California with the homeless problem. Same thing here in Colorado, where it's like, yeah, we keep this homeless problem going. Why? Because, I'm going to create a nonprofit. I'm going to get $1 million in grants from the government, and I'm going to make $2,000 a year running this nonprofit that is serving the homeless. And so, no, I don't want homelessness to go away. I just want to ease the burden of homelessness. And that's exactly what a lot of people would claim, or critics would claim, is what the USCCB is doing, is that they're funneling money. They're working, cooperating with the government, with the Biden administration, who's letting all these legal immigrants in. They're saying, you kind of promote this or endorse it. We will give you lots of money. You can then use that money to, yes, I'm not saying that none of it is going, that they're not feeding the homeless or feeding illegal immigrants or helping them get housing. Some of it is going to those causes for sure. Other things are going to other interests and other organizations that they are then receiving favors from. It's all politics and just general corruption. But you can't just say, oh, see, look, they reported that all the money went to the illegal immigration causes, and therefore it's all good and we should just be happy about it and shut up. And JD Vance is a big old meanie.
Yeah. I do want to just one thing you said in there that I want to go back to is people keep arguing with me about rights on Instagram. And I think the reason is because, again, we have lost sight of the fact that our government actually doesn't give us rights initially. Like, we have natural rights, we have God-given rights. And so that, I think that distinction needs to be made and is missed a lot, especially with well-meaning, I would say, evangelicals that I discuss this with, because they don't have the tradition of the church behind them to kind of go back to those natural law rights, from the rights that come from God. And I think that confuses a lot of people because they're like, well, that's not in the Constitution, which is obviously what our country is under. But as humans, we have God-given rights, right? So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because I think people and I even think that sometimes in my mind when people say oh, I have a right to that, it's like, okay, but is it a government right or is it a God-given right? Because those are, they hold different weight, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, money's fungible, and all you have to do is look at the Ukraine situation, right? We're sending all this money over there. Where's it going? And then I
Well, it's all
found some
going to the war, right? It's
right,
all going,
right.
yeah,
Well,
directly to the
and
war.
to the U.S. manufacturers that are creating the stuff for the war, right? So it's like I found
Oh,
like
right.
some like it's funneling back into America, and so it's helping our
Yep.
economy. So we can't stop sending money to them because it's helping us. And there's actual reporting on that of like how much I think it's over half of the money is coming straight back to the U.S. economy to go into creating guns, tanks, whatever. So you can have the argument about whether that's right or wrong, but to just say like, hey, we're sending all this over there, it's like completely just a gift of ourselves. It's just obviously not right. So yeah, money's fungible. I do want to, you kind of touched on this, but there are good bishops, and I don't think that everything the USCCB does is wrong. I actually think they do a pretty good job of like paying lip service to the right things, at least, or like putting out like a letter saying what the church teaches. For instance, in the situation of vaccines, they put out a really good letter on that. They just don't follow it. In practice, it doesn't happen. And that's what my big issue with the USCCB is they don't really say anything that I would say like, oh, that's heretical or something along those lines, but they focus on the wrong issues, and they don't actually in practicality live out what they say in these letters, right? So I'll read this second part from the Catechism on the same topic, that the more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they are able, to welcome the foreigner in search of the security and the means of livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin. So there's a couple things there, right? As much as they are able. So who makes that rule, right? Who decides when we're at our capacity, when we're at our limit? When does it start infringing on our human rights, as you said? And then the means of livelihood which they can't find in their own countries. Are they coming here when they really can't find a job there? I've read and heard quite a few things of where they're coming here because they can, make more money, than they go back and just build like a fancy house back where, they're from, like that kind of thing. So is that necessary? Do they need that for security or for, living conditions or that kind of thing? So all that stuff goes into it. And I think that all those questions are actually reasonable questions to have a discussion about. Like, I'm not, shutting down this discussion, like shut them all out, don't let anybody in. That's not really, I don't actually think that's most conservatives' stance. I just think
No.
anybody with common sense knows there's a limit, right? And you were talking about Denver, and even I think was it the Denver mayor that was like, stop, we're no longer a sanctuary city, like don't send them here. Was that the mayor or the governor? I can't remember.
I think the governor. So
was
yeah,
it the governor?
so,
Yeah.
yeah, the governor started getting it kind of in step around the same time as Eric Adams from New York City was. But
Yep.
our mayor originally was anti the deportations, and so he was one of the ones. I don't know if you saw the clip of him saying like, "Oh, I don't want to participate in this, and I'm willing to go to prison." You didn't see that?
I think I did. Now, yeah, and then
Oh,
they
I gotta
clapped
see
back
if I
and
can.
said, and Tom Homan said,
Yes.
"Yeah, you're going to prison." Yeah, I did see that. He's like, "All right,
And
great."
Tom
Come
Homan,
on
he was
over.
like, "Oh," he said, "Oh, I gotta pull it up." But yes, you're
That's
exactly
funny.
right. That certain people started to see like, "Hey, we can't do this anymore."
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
yeah.
not sustainable, right? So,
It's too much.
I mean, New
Yeah.
York City, like you said, New York City came to the same conclusion. There's just a limit.
Hey, let me see if I think I got this here. Let me know if you can hear it. This is just so funny. We gotta show it. It's only 30 seconds. But Tom Homan, I just always think he's so incredible. He's so hilarious.
He's willing to go to jail. I'm willing to put him in jail.
Mike Dubke, I mean, look, it's very clear the country is very unhappy with the way.
Oh man, yeah, just like he is like, there's two things we have. One thing we have in common.
That's right. That's right.
Willing to put him in jail.
And her face is just like
CNN really happy about it.
Yeah.
And now they're just like cooking in Denver. They're up and running. And I even had a friend. I don't know how true this is. I didn't see any reports on it or anything. I can see if I can find anything. But somebody said they put up a fake nightclub and they arrested like 40 people.
I did see that. Yep.
Oh,
I saw
did you?
that. Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
that going around. And then they found an apartment complex. I don't think this was in Denver,
Oh, yeah, it's
where
real.
the owner of the apartment complex was actually just renting to a gang, essentially rented out like the whole complex to a gang, and it was all under the table. So he was making
wow.
all kinds of money off of it, and they found it, and they're all gone. So I guess he just lost all of his tenants in one day.
Yeah, it's a tough financial day for him for sure. Yeah, so this year, Denver federal and local law enforcement agencies raided a makeshift nightclub in Adams County early Sunday morning and took 41 people living in the country illegally. Another 8 who were in the nightclub into custody. according to the DEA. That's wild. Really? A makeshift nightclub. They're getting creative, that's for sure. I saw a funny one where Dr. Phil was out with them, was with Tom Homan, and they like busted some dude together. And it's going
That's
down
funny.
out there. That is for
Who
sure.
thought Dr. Phil would be on our side, right? Like I did
He's-
not see that one coming. So
I mean, for like him being like so close with Oprah, I felt like for a long time, you know, kind of under
Yeah.
her tutelage there at the beginning. And now they've sprinted in opposite directions, which is,
well, she used to love Trump, right? There's I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever seen those clips going around of her having him on, and she just loved him, but not anymore. So,
something changed.
I don't know what it could have been, but
Yeah, that's right. No, it's really interesting. I think, yeah, you hit on a lot of really good stuff there. And it's important, I think, as you mentioned, for us to remember, I think even sometimes when we're in the conservative movement, because you do have some people who are on the extreme, on the other side, right? That are just like, you know, no immigrants, like we need to cut it off, or I don't care what happens. Kind of like your point there to saying it's not good to just be yanking kids out of school. And I think you have to be, cognizant of how you do it with children. But you also can't be on the extreme other side saying that like, oh, it's immoral to deport children or deport families together. These pictures we see of like, oh, look at this baby crying or this kid crying as they're getting deported, or the separating parents, that kind of stuff. It's really difficult because it's like, well, what do you do? And there's so many drug dealers or sex traffickers who have come into the country with children who weren't even their own. But because they have kids, it's like, oh, we let them stay. And if you know that, if you incentivize people to come in with children, do you think the cartel members care if they're coming in with their child or not, or care about the well-being of that child after they get in here? These people who are torturing children, who are murdering children in these other countries in South America and Central America, no, they don't. And so to incentivize, say, oh, as long as you have a child, you know, someone under 18 with you, we'll let you in and you can stay here forever. It's not a good, anything you incentivize or you permit, whatever route you take, they will abuse it, and evil people will abuse it. There will be some good people who are trying to come as families as well. There have been good people who have crossed the border illegally as families trying to escape bad situations, but it doesn't mean that we should just then let everybody just stay. You know?
yeah, I think that's
that.
a really good example of a policy that sounds good in theory, but in practicality just does not work out, which I think, in my opinion, that's a huge number of liberal policies where they like sound really nice and empathetic and everything in theory, but when you play them out practically, they just do not work that way. And so you get to be, you know, the moral superior saying, look at how nice I am because I support this policy, which in reality does not actually do good things for immigrants, like you said, for these children or for your country, you know, so you're really getting it on both sides, even though you're acting like you're empathetic. And I think a lot of really well-meaning people do think that they are legitimately, you know, having real empathy for these people and doing the right thing. So like, I think that there's a lot of good people out there that think they're on the right side of this, but just when you play it out practically in your mind, it does not equal out to a good policy, which there's a book by Anthony Esolen, I'm not sure how you say his name. It's called Catholic Social Teaching. And it's really a great book. He breaks it all down into like how things sound good, but they're not really, and what Catholic social teaching actually means, because that's gotten lost a lot, like, you know, through the years of just what that was supposed to be. People take it to the extreme, again, both ways. Like I had a few people reach out to me and say like, we shouldn't allow anybody in because they're going to end up replacing us and things like that. And I was like, okay, that's a little dramatic, but we could also help that situation by having more kids, because we do have a problem with that in our country. But
right. Yeah.
But you know,
white people are concerned about that. They could just stop. I know so many
stop being the what is that
dink
thing or whatever.
Oh yeah, dual income, no kids, baby.
Everybody I've seen do that has been extremely white and ridiculous. So I'm just saying, like, if you don't want to replace, if you're replaced, then I have a good idea for you. Yeah.
That's right. I love it. I want to show this video. I've talked about it. I've referenced it before on the podcast, but never got into it. Just kind of shifting gears a little bit. Another thing that I think I would say probably number 2 most confused, or there's a lot of misinformation out there, disinformation out there, confusing people about tariffs. And so I want to play this video to kind of get your take on it. I don't know if have you seen this before? This guy kind of breaking down the tariff.
I have not seen that one.
This actually comes from the election cycle, like kind of election season.
Okay.
But I think he does a really good job of explaining it. So we'll watch a little bit of this here.
President, about tariffs. Do you see it as a bargaining chip, or do you think you're going to see tariffs across the board of 20%?
I think we should put tariffs on stuff we make and not put tariffs on stuff we don't make. It's pretty simple. And of course, it's a bargaining chip. We can't sell a Ford or GM in Europe. You go to Europe, you can't sell a Ford or GM. Why? There's 100% tariffs. How about in Japan? 100% tariffs. So do you think if we said, we're going to tariff you the way you tariff us, do you think they're going to allow Mercedes and all these Japanese companies and Porsches and BMWs to all of a sudden have 100% tariffs in America? Of course not. They're going to come and negotiate, and their tariffs are going to come down. And finally, Ford and General Motors are going to be able to sell in these places.
How's that sound?
Of course they're going to come down. Of course. This is just negotiating.
It absolutely makes sense. If you do it strategically, if it's across the board, it creates a real problem. And the question is whether you believe the president is going to do it strategically or across the board. He keeps saying it across the board.
Well, when you
So that for me, I think is super interesting because most people don't understand these at all. I'll admit, I think tariffs are a somewhat complicated issue. This is not something that I talk about every day. But I think that obviously, those of us who are supportive of Trump are going to believe in his ability to do it strategically and not just do it across the board on all things. I don't know why he would do that or what would be the purpose of it. I think that everything he does is strategic, whether it's good or bad, whether you agree with it or not, from his business days to now. But I also think that the biggest thing for me with Trump, especially in his first term, was it felt like somebody with common sense got into the Oval Office and saw, wow, America has so many crappy deals around the world, and we foot the bill for so many things, and we fight the wars, and we're the world peacekeeper, and we're the biggest member of every organization we're a part of, financially, and even just power and influence-wise. And he was like, this needs to stop. Like, we're racking up debt in order to do this, and we still are just like paying money all across the world. And he's like, we're just getting bad deals in so many places. And this to me felt like one of them. And nobody knows about that, right? Nobody knows. You go to Europe. Yeah. Why don't you see Ford and Chevys all over the place, just like you see those kinds of cars here? Like we see Toyota. I mean, I drive a Toyota here in the United States. We have Toyotas all over, all these Japanese cars, Hondas. Why do you see Chevy Malibus the same way you see Camrys in Tokyo? Probably not. So, yeah, what is kind of your take on the tariff conversation?
Yeah. So one thing I think to keep in mind with Trump, he says a lot of things, right? He's always saying things, sometimes better than others. When he actually follows through on things, they usually turn out well for our country. Like if you really want to go in and dig into what he actually does. And I think, that's a hard thing for people who just listen to the news to get to, because you don't get that from them. You just get like the latest thing he said, and he says some dumb things, right? Like I'm all on board with that. He says some really dumb things. But I don't actually even think he ever said tariffs across the board. I think people just sort of took that and ran with it and started throwing out percentages of how much our economy was going to be inflated and things like that, because it went so well the last 4 years. But yeah, I think, he makes a lot of sense of we're not going to just tariff everything. There's going to be certain things that we're going to do. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that Trump is not actually sitting at that desk making every minute decision of what happens in the country. Now, it all filters back to him as like the final say, so he gets all the credit or all of the blame for whatever it is. But he's got people around him, right? Like he's going to have a guy who's in charge of finances, in charge of the budget. Like he's going to have a whole lot of people working with him. And that's just because there's way too many issues for him to sit and personally say, like, this is the nitty gritty of the percentage we're going to do for this or that. Now, does that mean he's not really involved? I'm sure he is, especially because the finances is like his thing, right? He's a businessman. That's like, I'm sure he's very involved in those decisions. But I don't think that, as much as people think he is just going to do whatever he wants, he seems to listen to counsel, in my opinion, because maybe not when he's just like shooting off at the mouth, but he does in like his actual policies, because he has changed policies or said like, oh, I realized that didn't make sense or whatever. So I think he's more open to that than you think. But again, like he's not going to be the one sitting there making all the minute decisions of what we're going to tariff. That being said, I don't think it's a great long-term strategy. Like, I don't think you want to be like tariffing countries into oblivion. It doesn't like make sense. But exactly what he said makes sense, right? If we make it here, don't tariff it. If you don't, then tariff it. He is a negotiator, and people kind of think that one of the things that I think is a perk about him is you don't really ever know what he's going to do. Like, he is a little bit of like a wild card, and people don't like that. But that scares other countries, right? So they're going to be
Yeah.
open to what you have to say because they really don't know if you're going to actually do. Did you see the whole thing with the kind of tie it back in, I guess, to the Colombia deportation situation?
Yep. So I was just about to bring that up.
Yep.
I also had that queued up.
Yeah, let's see it.
So-
Let's see it. That's like a perfect merge of these two things.
And this is awesome. It's some British news site that's covering this here. We'll just watch like a minute of this one.
Donald Trump's mass deportation came to a house in Chicago yesterday where police took 2 men into custody, part of a wide-ranging crackdown across the Windy City as the new president makes good on his promise to round up and kick out alleged illegal migrants and send them home to countries across Latin America. But it was this footage of migrants shuffling in shackles being unloaded in Brazil from the US that caught the attention of Colombia's president, who in turn refused migrant planes headed to his country too. A migrant is not a criminal and must be treated with the dignity that a human being deserves, President Petro said on X. That is why I returned the US military planes that were carrying Colombian migrants. But he quickly incurred the wrath of President Trump, who said on his Truth Social platform, 2 repatriation flights were not allowed to land in Colombia. So in retaliation, he announced emergency 25% tariffs on all goods, a travel ban, and immediate visa revocations, promising these measures are just the beginning. Several hours of back and forth posturing ensued before finally the White House declared victory. The government of Colombia has agreed to all of President Trump's terms, the press secretary said. Today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again.
It's incredible. I mean, the hidden gem, I think, in her kind of wrapping it up there towards the end is after a few hours of tensions. A few hours. Like, it's hard to imagine and really like comprehend how fast that happened. Like, it was in the span of just enough time for the AOCs and like Harry Sizon or whatever that little like Democratic influencer's name is, like just enough time for them to kind of tweet it out and talk about, look at this. AOC was like, our coffee is going to be so expensive. This is going to all be on the American taxpayer. This is going to all American citizens. Everything's going to go up in price. And then immediately the president of Colombia, from what I heard, was even like, yeah, you can even use my plane. Like, they can even fly back.
It was like, here's my plane.
Personal plane.
Hilarious.
He was
not
like,
to
I'm sorry.
mention,
I didn't
I
need
know,
it.
not to mention it was all done on social media, right? Which is wild to think about. Like, all this stuff was like public statements back and forth. And then he's like, yeah, here's my plane. Like, what a brave new world we're in. We're just like fighting with the president of Colombia over, over Truth Social or Twitter or whatever. Yeah, super funny. Not to mention with the AOC situation, I think we would all deal with like a little bit more expensive coffee if it meant like getting, criminal activity under control. It's just funny the things
women
that
are
they're
being
like
burned on the subway.
Right. Yeah, no big deal though. We're just like, our coffee is going to be real expensive. So yeah, it's just,
And it comes from other places. That's the other thing that I think is just so dumb about it. Like, you go to your local coffee shop. I go down the street to Mango Tree. Like, they have Ethiopian coffee. They have coffee from Brazil. It's like, this is what the guy was talking about. Even the liberal guy, I think on CNBC there, is saying like, if it's done strategically, it's like, yes, this is why it wouldn't make sense to do it across the board. Say like all coffee is going to be that would raise prices, at least for stuff that's coming from out of our country, which is why the guy said that if things we make here, you can just, it's not a huge difference between the Chevy Malibu price and the Camry price. And so you just go buy the Chevy Malibu instead of the Camry if it was $5,000 more for the Camry, right? It was just going to buy American made things instead of going elsewhere for it. But you also just give more opportunity to other countries who are cooperating with us and actually grateful for the things that we give them and the opportunity we give them and the opportunity we give their migrants who come to our nation. And so, yeah, it's just a silly thing. But I just thought it was beautiful that in the first week, you got to see an example of tariffs laid down.
Yeah.
It was like 25%. In a week, it's going to 50, which is like I'm not waiting all month for this. This isn't going to be a 2025 battle. Yeah, like you're going to accept them and you're going to do it this week. And
yeah, he's a great
I hope
negotiator.
That those Colombians enjoy their homeland.
Yeah, I think that he's a great negotiator in that people always think he's going to war, right? Like he's threatening. Well, that's, peace through strength, right? Like he's just throwing things out there, and he is going to negotiate financially before anything else because that's what he knows. And it works. Money talks, and we are like it or not, we're funding every country in the world, apparently, in some form or fashion. So, they don't want to lose that.
Yep. Absolutely. I love it. Well, Bridget, in our last minute here, tell people about, where they can find you and where they can subscribe to hear more of your takes.
Oh, well, if you're still around, I have my Instagram handle is according to Bridget, and that's primarily where I am. I do have a Substack, same name, but I don't have a lot of time for long form these days. Babies keep me pretty busy, but I do sometimes post some longer form stuff there. There's actually one on the USCCB Catholic Charities situation, so if you're interested, that's there. But yeah, according to Bridget's the easiest place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bridget. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and we look forward to having you on, not in years, but hopefully in months or maybe even weeks, like the 6 to 12 week range back on
sounds
Seeking
great.
Excellence. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nathan.